Welsh Borderlands, October 1923. The first frost had already killed the late potatoes when Thomas Brennan began laying stones in a shape that made the entire village of Cwmbach question his sanity. While other men built sensible rectangular cottages with proper corners and straight walls, this former quarryman was setting fieldstones in a perfect circle, 18 feet across, with walls that curved inward like the base of some ancient beehive. His neighbors watched from the lane. The postmaster shook his head. The chapel minister mentioned something about pride and folly in his Sunday sermon. But Thomas kept working, selecting each stone with the care of a man who'd spent 20 years reading the language of rock and weight. The ridicule grew louder with every course of stone. Brennan's built himself a pigsty, one farmer said at the pub. Another called it a shepherd's folly. But Thomas wasn't building for approval. He was building against the killing wind that swept down from the Black Mountains every winter, the wind that found every corner, every joint, every gap in the rectangular cottages that lined the valley. What did this Welsh quarryman understand about thermal dynamics that centuries of traditional builders had missed? Before I reveal the engineering secret behind his impossible warmth, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what Thomas built wasn't primitive. It was geometry perfected. Thomas Brennan came to the Brecon Beacons in 1901 as a young man, hired to work the slate quarries above Talybont. For 20 years he cut stone, shaped it, and learned its secrets. But most importantly, he observed the old structures scattered across the Welsh hills, the Iron Age roundhouses, the medieval dovecotes, the ancient corbelled huts that shepherds still used for shelter. These buildings had survived centuries. Some had been standing for 1,000 years. And they all shared one thing in common. They were round. The cottages in Cwmbach were not round. They were proper Welsh longhouses built the way cottages had been built for 300 years. And every winter, they bled heat through their corners like wounds that wouldn't close. Thomas had lived in one of these cottages for 12 years with his wife Ellen and their 4 children. He knew how ice formed on the inside of windows by midnight. He knew how the northeast corner never warmed no matter how the fire roared. He knew how the wind found every gap where 2 walls met at a right angle. The physics were simple. Corners create turbulence. When wind hits a flat wall, it flows along the surface until it reaches a corner, then tumbles and swirls, creating low-pressure zones that suck warm air out through any gap. A rectangular building has 4 of these turbulence points. A round building has none. Wind hitting a curved surface simply flows around it, smooth and uninterrupted. No corners to catch, no edges to exploit, but there was more. In a rectangular building, corners represent the maximum surface-to-volume ratio. More exterior wall relative to interior space. More opportunity for heat to escape. A circle has no such weakness. Every point on the wall is equidistant from the center. For any given floor area, a circle encloses the maximum space with the minimum perimeter. Less wall means less heat loss. It's not opinion. It's mathematics. Owen Pritchard, the village's most experienced builder, stopped by on the 3rd day of construction. He'd built 14 cottages in 40 years, all rectangular, all solid. Brennan, that's not how walls work. You can't build a dwelling on a curve. The weight won't distribute properly. Thomas kept working. The weight distributes better on a curve, Owen. Think about an arch. The curve carries load more efficiently than any straight line. Pritchard left unconvinced. By evening, half the village had heard about the quarryman who thought he could build walls in circles. Margaret Hughes summed up the consensus when she spoke to Ellen at the market. Your Thomas has lost his mind, love. A round house? Nothing fits in a circle. Where do you put the dresser? Ellen didn't argue. She just said what she'd told everyone. We'll see come January. The construction took 3 months. Thomas built the walls 2 feet thick at the base, tapering to 18 inches at the top. Over 30 tons of stone. The roof was a corbelled dome, each course projecting slightly inward until the opening at the top was small enough to cap with a single stone. He left a 2-foot hole in the center, directly above where the hearth would sit. This wasn't oversight, it was ventilation. Smoke would rise naturally, creating a draft that pulled fresh air through the low door and small windows. The circular flow would distribute heat throughout the space before escaping upward. By Christmas, the structure was weathertight. The central hearth was a raised stone platform designed to radiate heat in all directions rather than losing it up a chimney against one wall. Owen Pritchard stopped by again. "It's solid," he admitted. "But solid doesn't mean warm. Stone conducts cold. You've built yourself a beautiful ice house." Thomas pointed to the walls. 2 feet thick, 30 tons of mass. "That stone doesn't conduct cold. It stores heat. Once it warms up, it stays warm." "We'll see," Pritchard said, and he left. The test came January 6, 1924. The wind came down from the Black Mountains like a blade, sustained at 40 miles per hour with gusts over 60. Temperature dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to freeze the stream solid. Cold enough to kill exposed livestock. In the rectangular cottages of Cwmbach, the wind found its targets. It caught corners and swirled into vortices that sucked warmth out faster than fires could replace it. The Hughes cottage couldn't maintain 45 degrees despite coal consumption that would bankrupt them by March. Ice formed on the inside of windows. Children slept in coats. Owen Pritchard's cottage, which he'd built 30 years earlier and considered the finest in the village, held 48 degrees directly in front of the fireplace. The corners read 38. His wife wore 3 layers of wool indoors and still shivered. And in the round stone structure on the hillside, Thomas Brennan lit a modest fire of oak and ash, feeding it perhaps a third of what his neighbors burned, and watched the temperature climb. The wind hit the curved walls and slid around them. No corners to catch. The small windows, set deep in 2-foot-thick walls, created natural windbreaks. But it was the thermal mass that truly performed. Those 30 tons of stone had been absorbing heat for weeks. Now the mass radiated back, surrounding the family in warmth from the walls themselves. The central hearth sat in the middle of the space, radiating equally in all directions. The dome created natural convection, warm air rising to the peak, cooling, descending along walls in gentle circulation that prevented the stratification plaguing rectangular rooms. By midnight, with wind howling and temperatures dropping toward zero, the Brennan roundhouse measured 63 degrees. Owen Pritchard trudged up the hill the next morning, expecting to find the family suffering. Ellen answered the door in a house dress, no shawl. Behind her, children ate breakfast in cotton clothes. The fire burned low, barely more than coals. The warmth hit Pritchard like walking into a bakery. "What's your temperature?" "About 65 this morning," Thomas said. "Dropped to 61 overnight when I let the fire bank." Pritchard had families celebrating if they hit 40, and here was 65 degrees while burning a third of the fuel. He walked to the curved wall and placed his palm against the stone. It was warm, actually warm to the touch. The mass had absorbed so much heat it was radiating back like a gentle oven. "The walls themselves," he said slowly. "They're heating the room." Thomas nodded. 30 tons at 65 degrees, even if the fire dies, that mass radiates for hours. The curve holds it in. Pritchard walked the perimeter. No cold spots, no thermal bridging, no corners where heat drained away. "I was wrong," he said. "Stay with me, because the numbers that came out of this cabin changed how people built in this valley for the next 50 years. Hit that like button and subscribe for more survival techniques that actually worked." The measurements spread through Cwmbach faster than wind. Over the remaining winter weeks, anyone with a thermometer recorded the difference. During the February cold snap, exterior temperatures dropped to 15 degrees for 5 consecutive days. Owen Pritchard's cottage maintained 51 degrees average with constant fire. Coldest corners measured 41, a 10-degree variance that created constant discomfort. The Brennan roundhouse maintained 66 degrees average with temperature variance of only 3 degrees throughout the entire space. Warmest point near the hearth, 68. Coolest point against the north wall, 65. But fuel consumption told the real story. Thomas's records showed January through February consumption of approximately 1.2 tons of wood, gathered free from hedgerows and deadfall. Owen Pritchard burned 3.8 tons of coal at 28 shillings per ton. Thomas achieved 15 degrees more warmth while burning roughly a third of the fuel. A family could save £4 per winter. In a village where average annual wage was £80, that was 5% of total income. Enough for shoes, enough for meat, enough to mean the difference between poverty and security. The health comparisons were harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. The Brennan children finished winter without coughs. Ellen, who'd suffered bronchitis every February, made it through without illness. Throughout the village, cold homes bred sickness. The round house stayed warm, and its occupants stayed well. By spring, builders from neighboring valleys rode over to see for themselves. Thomas answered every question. A square with 18-foot sides encloses 324 square feet, he'd explain, sketching in dirt. The perimeter is 72 feet of wall losing heat. A circle with the same floor area has a perimeter of just under 63 feet, 13% less wall surface. He'd point to the dome. And the curved roof does the same thing. A peaked roof has a ridge line where hot air escapes. A dome has no peak. Warm air circulates with nowhere to escape except through the ventilation hole, which I control. By summer, Thomas had helped design 3 more round structures. Owen Pritchard built the first one. He was 64 years old and had never constructed anything without corners. But he'd felt the warmth, seen the numbers. His round cottage, completed in September, was 14 feet in diameter with 2-foot walls and central hearth. That winter, Owen burned 1.1 tons of coal. His previous winter had consumed 3.8 tons. The savings paid for construction within 2 seasons. By 1930, 23 round structures dotted the hills around Cwmbach. The exact numbers varied, but the pattern held. Round buildings maintained temperatures 15 to 25 degrees warmer than rectangular buildings while consuming 40 to 60% less fuel. Thomas never patented his design, never wrote a book. He just kept building, kept demonstrating that sometimes the old ways, the ways that predated recorded history, were actually the most sophisticated solutions available. The Iron Age roundhouses had been warm for a reason. The medieval dovecotes had kept birds alive through brutal winters for a reason. The corbelled huts had sheltered shepherds for centuries for a reason. The reason was geometry. Thomas lived in his round house until his death in 1951. The structure stood solid through 28 winters. Today, visitors can walk through and feel what his neighbors felt that January morning. The docents light a fire in the central hearth. The warmth radiates from walls, and people who've spent lives in rectangular homes realize something has been lost. What Thomas proved wasn't that his neighbors were ignorant. What he proved was more subtle. Sometimes the answers we need are older than the questions we're asking. The right angle dominates modern construction because it's easy to standardize. But easy doesn't mean optimal. The physics of heat loss don't care about tradition. Wind calculates in geometry, in surface area, in corners and joints. Thomas convinced no one with words. He convinced them with 55 degrees of temperature difference and a third of the fuel bill. He convinced them by being right when everyone said he was wrong. Because sometimes what looks like madness is actually mathematics, and sometimes building a roundhouse isn't primitive at all. It's the smartest choice anyone could make.